Chapter 1. The Auction of Shadows. The auction hall reeked of old blood and older money. Evangeline stood on the platform beneath flickering gas lamps, her wrists bound with silver cord that burned cold against her skin. Around her, the elite of the vampire world gathered in their finery, silk cravats and velvet gowns that belonged to centuries past, their pale faces beautiful and terrible in the amber light. She was merchandise, nothing more. Lot 17, the auctioneer announced, his voice echoing through the vaulted chamber. Human, female, 23 years of age, bloodline, untested but promising. No previous contracts. Evangeline kept her eyes fixed on the marble floor, counting the veins of gold that threaded through the stone. If she looked up, if she met their hungry gazes, she would crumble. And she had promised herself, promised her dying mother, that she would survive this night. The bidding began. 500 gold marks, called a voice from the left, dry as parchment, ancient as dust. 700, countered another, younger but no less predatory. She felt their eyes crawling over her skin, assessing, evaluating. The thin cotton dress they'd given her did nothing to shield her from their scrutiny. Her dark hair had been unbound, cascading down her back in waves they'd brushed until it shone. They wanted her to look beautiful, desirable, breakable. 1,000 marks. The new voice cut through the others like a blade through silk. Deep, commanding, absolute. The chamber fell silent. Evangeline's head snapped up despite herself. He stood at the back of the hall, shrouded in shadows that seemed to cling to him like living things. She couldn't see his face clearly, only the gleam of eyes that caught the lamplight and held it, silver as moonlight on water, cold as winter stars. Lord Cassius bids 1,000, the auctioneer stammered, and Evangeline heard the fear in his voice. Do I hear? 1,500. The challenger emerged from the crowd, a vampire lord in crimson and black, his smile revealing fangs that gleamed like polished ivory. Lord Mordecai. She'd heard the other servants whisper his name with terror. He collected humans the way others collected art, and he broke them just as carelessly. The lady interests me, Mordecai purred, moving closer to the platform. His gaze raked over Evangeline with undisguised hunger. Such unusual eyes. Violet, like twilight itself. I wonder if her blood tastes as rare as she looks. Evangeline's breath caught. She'd inherited her mother's eyes, the only beauty in a life of servitude and struggle. Now, they would be her curse. 2,000 marks. The shadow-shrouded Lord, Cassius, stepped forward, and the crowd parted before him like water before a ship's prow. Final offer. The shadows fell away as he entered the light. Evangeline forgot to breathe. He was beautiful in the way cathedrals were beautiful, ancient and solemn and touched by something beyond mortal understanding. Dark hair fell to his shoulders, framing a face of sharp elegance. High cheekbones, a mouth carved for cruelty or poetry, and those impossible silver eyes that now fixed on her with an intensity that made her knees weak. But it was more than his appearance. Power radiated from him like heat from a forge, making the air itself seem to bend and shimmer in his presence. Lord Cassius, Mordecai said, his smile never wavering, the vampire king himself graces our little auction. How unexpected. Surely you have no need of another servant in your vast estate. My needs are not your concern, Mordecai. Cassius's voice was soft, almost gentle. It made the threat in his words all the more terrible. Withdraw your bid. It wasn't a suggestion. Mordecai's smile finally flickered. For a heartbeat, Evangeline saw something move behind his eyes. Calculation, fear, rage. Then he bowed, the gesture mocking in its precision. Of course, Your Majesty. Far be it from me to deprive you of your Acquisition. The word dripped with venom. Evangeline watched as Mordecai retreated into the crowd, his crimson coat swirling like spilled blood. But his gaze found hers, one last time, and the promise in it made ice crystallize in her veins. This isn't over. Sold, the auctioneer declared, his relief palpable. Lot 17 to Lord Cassius for 2,000 gold marks. The silver cord around Evangeline's wrists dissolved into smoke at Cassius's gesture. She rubbed the burned skin absently, her mind reeling. The Vampire King. She'd been purchased by the Vampire King himself. Stories of him had reached even the servants' quarters, whispers of his age, his power, the darkness that clung to him like a second skin. Some said he was the first vampire, turned by ancient magic in an age when the world was young. Others claimed he'd once been something else entirely, something holy that had fallen into shadow and blood. All agreed on one thing: Lord Cassius did not keep servants long. They died, or they disappeared, or they went mad from proximity to his presence. Come. The command was soft, but Evangeline's feet moved before her mind could protest. She descended from the platform on trembling legs, the marble cold beneath her bare feet. The crowd parted as she walked toward him, their faces a blur of pale hunger and dark amusement. She stopped 3 paces away, close enough to see the impossible perfection of his features, the way no breath stirred his chest, the absolute stillness that marked him as something other than alive. "Look at me," he commanded. She raised her eyes to his, and the world narrowed to those twin points of silver light. They held her frozen, pinned like a butterfly beneath glass. She saw centuries in their depths, ancient grief and older rage, loneliness that spanned millennia, and beneath it all, something she couldn't name, but that made her pulse quicken with an emotion that wasn't quite fear. "You will come to my estate, tonight," Cassius said. His voice wrapped around her like silk and shadow. "You will serve in my household until I release you from service. Do you understand?" "Yes," Evangeline whispered. Then, remembering the protocols drilled into her since childhood. "Yes, my lord." Something flickered across his perfect features, too quick to read, too ancient to understand. "Good," he said softly. "Because from this moment forward, Evangeline, your life belongs to me." He turned and walked toward the exit, his coat billowing behind him like black wings, and Evangeline, her heart hammering against her ribs, her mother's warnings echoing in her memory, followed the Vampire King into the darkness. Chapter 2: The Castle of Forgotten Souls. The carriage that carried Evangeline through the night was a relic from another age, black lacquered wood inlaid with silver filigree, drawn by horses whose eyes gleamed red in the darkness. Lord Cassius sat across from her in silence, his gaze fixed on something beyond the curtained windows, beyond the present moment itself. She studied him when she thought he wasn't watching, trying to reconcile the terrible beauty of him with the stories she'd heard: the Vampire King, the Eternal Shadow, the last of the first blood. He looked no older than 30, but those silver eyes held the weight of centuries. "You're afraid," he said without looking at her, his voice cutting through the rhythmic clatter of hooves on cobblestone. It wasn't a question. "Yes, my lord," Evangeline answered, because lying to a creature who could hear the thunder of her pulse seemed pointless. "Good." Now he did look at her, and the intensity of his gaze made her breath catch. "Fear will keep you alive in my house. There are things within those walls that hunger for what you are." "And what am I, my lord?" The corner of his mouth lifted, not quite a smile, but close enough to send warmth flooding through her despite the cold emanating from his presence. "Human," he said simply, "mortal, breakable, everything I am not." The carriage turned onto a private road, and Evangeline pulled back the curtain to see her new prison rising against the starlit sky. Castle Ravencrest perched on a cliff overlooking a valley shrouded in perpetual mist, its towers stabbing upward like accusations against heaven. Gothic spires and gargoyles created a silhouette of such dramatic darkness that it seemed to devour the moonlight rather than reflect it. "It's beautiful," she breathed before she could stop herself. "It's a tomb," Cassius corrected, but his voice held something almost like approval. "I built it 300 years ago to keep the world out. And to keep myself in." The gates opened without a hand to guide them, groaning on hinges that might never have been oiled. They passed through a courtyard where dead fountains stood like monuments to forgotten joy, their basins dry as bone, their stone cherubs weeping nothing but shadows. The carriage stopped before massive, oak doors bound with iron. Cassius descended first, moving with liquid grace that defied natural law. He turned and offered his hand to Evangeline. She hesitated. To touch him seemed dangerous, as though contact might burn or freeze or bind her in ways she couldn't yet understand. "I don't bite on first meetings," he said, and this time it was definitely amusement in his voice. "Generally." She placed her hand in his. His skin was cold, not the cold of winter or ice, but something deeper. The cold of the grave, of centuries without warmth, of a heart that had forgotten how to beat. Yet his grip was steady, almost gentle as he helped her down. The moment their flesh connected, something sparked between them. Not pain, not pleasure, something stranger. A recognition, as though her blood remembered his touch from a dream she'd never had. Cassius's eyes widened fractionally. He released her hand as though it had burned him, stepping back with an abruptness that shattered his careful composure. "Inside," he commanded, his voice rougher now. "Quickly." The great doors swung open to reveal an entrance hall of impossible grandeur. Candlelight flickered from chandeliers suspended on chains that disappeared into shadow-draped heights. The walls were lined with portraits, lords and ladies from ages past, their eyes seeming to follow Evangeline as she entered. At the far end, a staircase of white marble swept upward, splitting into two wings that vanished into darkness. But it was the silence that struck her most profoundly. Not the absence of sound, but the presence of stillness, heavy and watchful and waiting. "Mrs. Thorne will show you to your quarters," Cassius said, and Evangeline turned to find a woman emerging from the shadows to her left. She was human. The first Evangeline had seen since entering the carriage, but ancient, her face a map of wrinkles, her eyes sharp as broken glass. She wore black silk that rustled as she moved, and a ring of iron keys hung at her waist. "This way, girl," Mrs. Thorne said, her voice surprisingly strong. "Mind you keep to your room after dark. The master's associates do not always control their appetites." "Mrs. Thorne serves as housekeeper and guardian of the daylight hours," Cassius explained. "You will obey her, as you would obey me." "Yes, my lord." He studied her for a long moment, those silver eyes searching for something she couldn't name. Then he nodded once, sharply, and turned toward a corridor that led deeper into the castle's heart. "My lord," Evangeline called before she could stop herself. He paused, but didn't turn. "Why did you buy me?" The question tumbled out, reckless and necessary. "Lord Mordecai said you have no need of servants. So why?" The silence stretched so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, still without turning, he spoke. "Because when I looked at you on that platform, I saw something I thought I'd lost the ability to see." His voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried through the vast hall with perfect clarity. "I saw the sun." He walked away, his footsteps silent on the marble floor, leaving Evangeline to wonder what such words could possibly mean from a creature of eternal night. "Come along, girl," Mrs. Thorne said, not unkindly. "Your room is in the east wing, where the morning light reaches first. The master? He requested it specially." As Evangeline followed the old woman up the staircase, she felt eyes watching from the portraits, from the shadows, from places she couldn't name. The castle breathed around her like a living thing, and somewhere in its depths, she heard the whisper of ancient hunger. But louder than all of it was the memory of Cassius's cold hand in hers, and the impossible warmth that had sparked between them. The sun, he'd called her. What did a vampire king want with sunlight? And what would he do when he realized that sunlight always burned? Chapter 3. The Midnight Visitation. Evangeline's room was a study in contrasts, beauty and imprisonment intertwined. The chamber occupied the highest point of the east tower, its tall windows overlooking the mist-shrouded valley below. Heavy velvet curtains in deep burgundy framed the glass, currently pulled back to reveal the star-scattered sky. A four-poster bed dominated the space, its canopy embroidered with silver thread that caught the candlelight and shimmered like captured moonbeams. Persian rugs softened the cold stone floor, and a writing desk stood near the window, its surface bare except for a single white lily in a crystal vase. A lily, the flower of death and resurrection. Mrs. Thorne had left her with a warning that still echoed in the silence. Lock your door at night, child, and whatever you hear in the corridors, whatever calls your name, do not answer. Evangeline had locked the door. She'd checked it 3 times. Now she sat on the edge of the bed in the thin nightgown Mrs. Thorne had provided, her hair loose around her shoulders, and tried to make sense of her new reality. She was a prisoner in a castle of vampires, owned by a king who looked at her as though she were something precious and terrible at once. I saw the sun. What had he meant? And why did those words make her heart race with something that felt dangerously like hope? The candles burned lower. Exhaustion pulled at her limbs, heavy as the velvet curtains. She should sleep. Tomorrow would bring new terrors, new mysteries to unravel. But when she closed her eyes, she saw Lord Mordecai's smile and the promise of violence it contained. This isn't over. A sound made her eyes snap open. Footsteps in the corridor outside her room. Slow, deliberate, stopping directly outside her door. Evangeline's breath froze in her lungs. The lock clicked. The door swung open on silent hinges, and Cassius stepped into her chamber as though locks and barriers meant nothing to him. He'd removed his coat, and in just his black silk shirt and fitted trousers, he looked less like a king and more like some dark angel fallen from grace. His silver eyes found her immediately, pinning her in place. "My lord," she whispered, pulling the thin blanket up as though it could shield her from his presence. The door was locked. I'm aware." He closed the door behind him with a gesture, not touching it. "Your locks cannot keep me out, Evangeline. Nothing in this castle can." He moved deeper into the room, and she noticed the tension in his shoulders, the rigid control in every movement, as though he were restraining something violent beneath that perfect aristocratic surface. "You shouldn't be here," she said, hating how her voice trembled. "It's not proper." Proper. The word seemed to amuse him. "Child, I am 347 years old. I have witnessed empires rise and fall. I have drunk from queens and killed kings. Propriety died for me long ago." "Then why come to my room?" The question emerged bolder than she'd intended. "If you mean to feed? Or worse?" "Worse?" His eyebrow arched. "What could be worse than feeding in your estimation?" Heat flooded her cheeks. "You know what I mean." "I do." He stopped at the foot of her bed, his hands clasped behind his back as though he didn't trust them near her. "But that is not why I'm here. I came to ensure you understand the rules of this household. Rules that will keep you alive. Mrs. Thorne doesn't know everything." His voice cut through hers like a blade. "There are 7 other vampires residing in this castle. Ancient ones, powerful ones, who are bound to me by blood oaths and older magic. They know you are under my protection, but protection only extends so far when hunger speaks loudly enough. Evangeline swallowed hard. What do I need to do? Never invite anyone into your room, never offer your blood freely, never wander the West Wing after sunset. He paused, his gaze intensifying. And never, under any circumstances, enter the catacombs beneath the castle. Do you understand? Yes, my lord. Cassius, he said quietly. When we are alone, you may call me Cassius. The intimacy of it shocked her. To use his given name felt like crossing an invisible threshold, acknowledging some connection she didn't yet understand. Why? She asked. Why does it matter what I call you? He was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he moved to the window, standing with his back to her, silhouetted against the starlight. Do you know what it means to be immortal? His voice was soft, almost contemplative. It means watching everyone you might have cared for grow old and die. It means centuries of silence, of distance, of existing, rather than living. I stopped using my given name 200 years ago. It seemed pointless, a relic of a humanity I'd lost. But you told me to use it. Yes. He turned to face her, and the raw emotion in his eyes stole her breath. Because when you looked at me tonight in that auction hall, when our hands touched, I felt something I thought was dead inside me. A spark, a warmth, something almost like life, she whispered. Yes. The word seemed torn from him. And I find myself wanting to hear my name spoken by a voice that still holds warmth, by someone whose heart still beats. Evangeline's pulse thundered in her ears. She should be terrified. He was a predator, and she was prey. But the loneliness in his voice, the ancient sorrow that clung to him like shadows, it called to something deep inside her. Cassius, she said softly, testing the shape of his name on her tongue. He closed his eyes as though the sound pained him. When he opened them again, they blazed with silver fire. You should not say it so sweetly, he whispered. It makes me remember what it was to be a man instead of a monster. Perhaps you're both. The words hung between them, dangerous, intimate, impossible to retract. Cassius moved toward her with supernatural speed, stopping mere inches from the bed. Close enough that she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the impossible perfection of his features. Close enough that she could feel the cold radiating from his skin like winter given form. Get some rest, Evangeline, he said, his voice rough. Tomorrow, your real education begins. He turned and walked toward the door, moving like smoke and shadow. Cassius, she called. He paused at the threshold. Thank you for the warning, for everything. He looked back at her, and for just a moment, she saw something in his face that looked almost like hope. Then he was gone, and she was alone with her racing heart and the memory of silver eyes that held centuries of darkness, and perhaps, buried deep within them, one small spark of light. Chapter 4. The Taste of Eternity. Evangeline woke to sunlight streaming through her windows, brilliant, golden, impossibly warm after the cold darkness of the previous night. For a moment she lay still, letting the light wash over her face, reminding herself that she was still alive, still breathing, still human. The castle felt different in daylight, less menacing, almost peaceful. She rose and dressed in the simple gray gown Mrs. Thorne had left folded on a chair, then ventured into the corridors. Without the shadows and candlelight, Ravencrest revealed itself as a masterpiece of Gothic architecture, vaulted ceilings with intricate ribbing, stained glass windows depicting scenes of medieval battles and ancient rituals, and everywhere, the scent of old stone and older secrets. Mrs. Thorne found her in the gallery, studying a portrait of a woman with violet eyes remarkably similar to her own. "That's Lady Isolde," the housekeeper said, making Evangeline jump. "The master's sister. She died 300 years ago, human, like you." "She looks like me." "Aye," the master noticed. Mrs. Thorne's expression was unreadable. "Come, he's requested you join him in the conservatory." The conservatory was a glass cathedral at the castle's southern edge, filled with night-blooming flowers, moonflowers, evening primrose, jasmine that released its perfume only after dark. But in the center, incongruous among the nocturnal blooms, grew a single rose bush heavy with blood-red blossoms. Cassius stood beside it, his back to her, one hand hovering over the thorns. "You're awake," he said, without turning. "I trust you slept well?" "Well enough, my Cassius." The name still felt strange on her tongue, intimate and dangerous. He turned, and in the daylight filtering through the glass ceiling, she saw what she'd missed in the darkness. He looked exhausted, as though existence itself wore on him. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his skin seemed even paler, almost translucent. "The sun weakens me," he said, reading her expression. "But it doesn't kill, as the stories claim. Not immediately. I can endure it for an hour, perhaps 2, before the pain becomes unbearable." "Then why meet me here?" "Because I wanted you to see me like this." He gestured to himself, to the conservatory, to the impossible contradiction of a vampire standing in sunlight. Diminished, vulnerable, mortal, almost. "You're trying to make me less afraid." "Am I succeeding?" Evangeline considered lying, then decided against it. "No, but I'm beginning to understand what you are beyond the monster." Something flickered across his face. Pleasure, perhaps, or pain. "Come, I have something to show you." He led her to a table set beneath the rose bush, where 2 crystal glasses waited. One held wine the color of rubies. The other was empty. "Sit," he commanded gently. She obeyed, her eyes fixed on the filled glass. The liquid was too thick to be wine, too dark to be anything innocent. "You fear it," Cassius observed, taking the seat across from her. "As you should. But understanding what I am requires understanding what I consume." "Blood," she whispered. "Life itself, distilled." He lifted the glass, tilting it so the light caught the crimson depths. "When I drink, I taste everything. Joy, sorrow, fear, hope. Every emotion that quickened the heart, every memory that stirred the soul. Blood is not merely sustenance, it is communion. That's why you bought me." The realization crashed over her like cold water. "You want to drink from me?" "Yes." He didn't flinch from the truth. "But not yet, and not against your will." "You're a vampire king. You could simply take it." "I could." He set the glass down, his silver eyes holding hers with burning intensity. "I have taken thousands of times over the centuries. I have fed on the willing and the unwilling, the innocent and the guilty. But with you—" He trailed off, and Evangeline watched emotions war across his ancient face. Hunger, restraint, something almost like reverence. "With me? What?" she pressed. "With you, I find myself wanting permission." His voice dropped to barely a whisper. "I want you to offer it freely, to trust me enough to let me taste not just your blood but your essence, and that terrifies me more than 3 centuries of darkness ever has." Evangeline's hand trembled as she reached for the empty glass. "Show me." "Evangeline, show me what it means." She held his gaze, refusing to look away despite the fear thundering through her veins. "If I'm to survive here, I need to understand. And if you truly want my permission someday, I need to know what I'd be giving you." Cassius studied her for a long moment. Then, moving with deliberate slowness, he withdrew a small dagger from his belt. Silver, ornate, its blade no longer than her little finger. "Your hand," he said. She extended it across the table, palm up, trying to control her shaking. He cradled her hand in his left palm, his cold fingers steady against her warm skin. With his right hand, he pressed the dagger's tip to her index finger, so gently she barely felt the prick. A single drop of blood welled up, perfect and red as the roses above them. Cassius brought her finger to his lips. The moment her blood touched his tongue, his entire body went rigid. His eyes flared silver bright, and a sound escaped him. Half gasp, half groan, entirely inhuman. His grip on her hand tightened, not painful but possessive, as though he might never let go. Evangeline watched, transfixed, as he closed his eyes and seemed to disappear into whatever sensation her blood provided. His expression shifted through a dozen emotions: shock, pleasure, something almost like agony. When he finally released her hand, he looked at her as though seeing her for the first time. "Impossible," he breathed. "What? What did you taste?" "Sunlight." His voice shook. "Your blood tastes like sunlight, Evangeline. Like warmth and life and everything I lost when I was turned. I have fed on thousands in my existence, but never, never have I tasted anything like you." He stood abruptly, putting distance between them, his hands clenching into fists. "You need to leave, now. Cassius, go." The word cracked like thunder, and shadows rippled around him like living things. "Before I forget every vow I've made, before I drain you dry just to feel the sun one more time. Go, Evangeline, please." She fled. But as she ran through the corridors toward her tower, one thought consumed her. He'd said please. A vampire king who could command her with a word, who could take whatever he wanted, had begged her to leave for her own safety, and somehow that terrified her more than his hunger ever could. Chapter 5. The Blood Court's Decree. 3 days passed before Evangeline saw Cassius again. Mrs. Thorne explained his absence with a single cryptic sentence: "The master feeds elsewhere when his control is tested." Evangeline spent those days exploring the castle's permitted areas, the library with its thousands of leather-bound volumes, the music room where a grand piano sat shrouded in dust, the portrait gallery where faces from forgotten centuries watched her pass. She learned the rhythms of a household that lived in reverse: humans stirring at dawn, vampires retreating to whatever dark places they slumbered. The separation was absolute. Until the night of the Blood Court. Mrs. Thorne came to her room as the sun set, carrying a gown of midnight blue silk that shimmered like captured starlight. "Put this on, quickly. The master has summoned you to the gathering." "What gathering?" "The Blood Court meets once each season in the Great Hall. All of the master's covenant must attend." The old woman's hands shook as she laced the corset. "And he's requested your presence. God help you, child." "Why would he?" "Because Lord Mordecai has challenged his claim to you." Ice flooded Evangeline's veins. Challenged? Old vampire law. Any lord may contest another's acquisition if they can prove stronger right or need. Mrs. Thorne met her eyes in the mirror. "Mordecai argues that the master has no use for a human servant, that he wastes your potential. He's demanded the court grant him custody instead." Can Cassius refuse? He is king, but even kings must honor the old laws, or risk civil war among his own kind. She finished with the dress and stepped back. "You look beautiful. That may help. Or doom you faster. I cannot say which." The great hall had been transformed. Candelabras blazed with black flames that cast violet shadows across the vaulted ceiling. Long tables formed a semicircle, and seated at them were the most beautiful and terrible beings Evangeline had ever seen. 7 vampires, each radiating power that made the air itself feel heavy. At the head table on a throne of carved obsidian sat Cassius. He wore robes of black velvet trimmed with silver, a crown of twisted iron resting on his dark hair. Every inch the vampire king. His silver eyes found her the moment she entered, and something flickered across his face. Concern, possessiveness, fear. Lord Mordecai stood in the center of the hall, dressed in crimson that seemed to glow in the unnatural light. His smile was all fangs and victory. "Ah, the prize arrives," he purred as Evangeline was led to stand before the assembled court. "How lovely she looks, like a lamb dressed for slaughter." "Mind your tongue, Mordecai," Cassius said, his voice soft but edged with steel. "The court is convened to hear your challenge, not your crude observations." "Of course, your majesty." Mordecai bowed with mocking grace. "I shall state my case plainly. You purchased this human 3 days ago for an exorbitant sum, yet you have made no use of her. You do not feed from her. You do not bed her. You barely see her. Such waste is an insult to our kind and a misuse of valuable resources." "How I utilize my property is not your concern," Cassius replied, but Evangeline heard the tension beneath his calm. "It becomes my concern when you hoard what you will not use." Mordecai circled her slowly, like a predator assessing prey. "I, however, would put her to excellent use. Her blood sings with potential. I can taste it from here. Sweet, pure, untainted. And those eyes?" He stopped in front of her, tilting her chin up with one cold finger. So rare, so exquisite. Evangeline tried not to flinch, but her heart hammered against her ribs. "Remove your hand from her," Cassius said, and the temperature in the hall dropped 10 degrees. Shadows writhed at the edges of the room. "Now." Mordecai smiled but obeyed, stepping back with exaggerated courtesy. "The challenge stands," announced a female vampire from the side table, Lady Seraphine, Mrs. Thorne had called her, one of the eldest. "Unless Lord Cassius can demonstrate legitimate need and usage, ancient law permits transfer of the contract." "I need no law to tell me what is mine," Cassius said, his voice dropping to something dangerous. "Even kings bow to tradition," another vampire interjected. Lord Thaddeus, scarred and battle-worn. "Especially when that tradition prevents bloodshed among our own. State your need, Cassius, or concede the challenge." Evangeline watched Cassius's jaw tighten. He was trapped, she realized. If he revealed the truth, that her blood tasted like sunlight, that she affected him in ways he couldn't explain, he'd expose a vulnerability that his enemies could exploit. But if he remained silent, he'd lose her to Mordecai's cruelty. Cassius began, and for the first time since she'd met him, he seemed uncertain. "I offer myself as proof," Evangeline heard herself say. Every eye in the hall fixed on her. "Explain yourself, human," Lady Seraphine commanded. Evangeline's mouth had gone dry, but she forced the words out. "Lord Cassius purchased me for a specific purpose. He told me so himself. I am unique. My blood holds properties he requires for research into ancient bloodlines." It was a lie, spun from desperation and intuition. But Cassius's eyes widened fractionally, and she saw understanding dawn. "Is this true?" Lord Thaddeus demanded. "It is," Cassius said smoothly, recovering his composure. "The girl's lineage traces back to the Moonborn, humans with trace vampire ancestry from the old bloodlines. I have been researching methods to identify and track such bloodlines for decades. She is a rare specimen." "Then you've tested her blood?" Mordecai's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Of course." Cassius rose from his throne, descending the steps with predatory grace. 3 days ago, the results were illuminating. He reached Evangeline and took her hand, the one he'd pricked with the dagger. His thumb brushed over the healed puncture wound, barely visible now, but unmistakable evidence. The research continues, Cassius said, his gaze locked with Mordecai's. And I will not have my work interrupted by your petty hungers. The hall fell silent. Evangeline could feel Mordecai's rage radiating like heat from a forge. The evidence seems clear, Lady Seraphine said finally. Lord Cassius has demonstrated legitimate use and ongoing need. The challenge is denied. This isn't over, Mordecai hissed, low enough that only Evangeline and Cassius could hear. That girl will be mine, one way or another. He swept from the hall in a swirl of crimson, and slowly the other vampires dispersed, their interest in the spectacle fading. Only Cassius and Evangeline remained. You lied for me, he said quietly. You were about to sacrifice your pride to save me, she countered. I couldn't let you do that. He studied her face in the flickering candlelight. Something like wonder in his ancient eyes. You are either the bravest human I've ever met, he said softly, or the most foolish. Perhaps both, she whispered. And when he smiled, a real smile, small and genuine and achingly human, Evangeline felt something shift inside her chest, something dangerous, something that felt almost like falling. Chapter 6. The Monster Beneath the Man. Cassius kept her by his side after the blood court dissolved. They walked through corridors she'd never seen before, descending deeper into the castle's heart. The walls here were older, rougher, carved from living stone rather than built with mortar and brick. Torches burned with blue flames that gave no warmth, only cold light that made shadows dance like restless spirits. Where are we going? Evangeline asked, her voice echoing strangely in the narrow passage. To the place where I became what I am, Cassius answered. You saved me tonight with your quick thinking. The least I can do is show you the truth of what you've bound yourself to. They emerged into a chamber that stole her breath. It was a chapel, or had been once. Stained glass windows, though underground and backed by nothing but stone, still glowed with eerie light. Pews lined the walls, rotted and collapsed. And at the far end, where an altar should have stood, there was instead a stone sarcophagus covered in chains of silver and iron. This is where I sleep, Cassius said quietly. When the sun rises and death claims me for a few hours each day, I return here, to the place where I died the first time. Evangeline moved closer to the sarcophagus, studying the intricate carvings that covered its surface. Angels and demons locked in eternal battle, their faces twisted with agony and ecstasy. You were mortal once, she said. What happened? He was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, moving to stand beside her, he placed one pale hand on the cold stone. I was a priest, he said, and the words seemed torn from some deep well of pain. 347 years ago, in a small village north of here. I believed in God with the fervor of the young and foolish. I believed that faith could protect against any darkness. His fingers traced one of the carved angels. A vampire came to our village during a plague year. She was beautiful, ancient, and hungry. She slaughtered 12 people before I confronted her with nothing but prayers and holy water. A bitter smile curved his lips. She found it amusing. My faith. My defiance. She said I had the spirit of a warrior trapped in a priest's robes. She turned you, Evangeline whispered. She offered me a choice. Watch everyone I loved die of plague or darkness, or accept her gift, and gain the power to protect them. He turned to face her fully. I chose damnation. I let her drain me to the edge of death, then drank from her wrist until her ancient blood remade me into something new. Did you save them? Your village? For a time? His voice was hollow. I hunted the creatures that preyed on them. I used my new strength to protect the weak. But immortality has a cost, Evangeline. I watched my friends grow old. I buried my parents. I held my sister, Isolde, as she died of fever, knowing that my cursed blood could not save her from mortal illness. The portrait in the gallery. The woman with violet eyes. And your maker? Evangeline asked softly. I destroyed her 200 years ago, when I finally accepted that there is no redemption for our kind, no salvation, only hunger and darkness and the slow erosion of everything that once made us human. He met her gaze, and she saw the monster lurking behind his civilized facade. That is what you protect, Evangeline. That is what you lied for tonight. A dead man walking in the skin of what he used to be. I don't believe that, she said, surprised by her own conviction. You should. He moved with inhuman speed, backing her against the sarcophagus. His hands came up to cage her against the stone, his face inches from hers. This close, she could see the predator in him, the slight flare of his nostrils as he scented her pulse, the way his eyes tracked the rhythm of her heartbeat in her throat. Do you know what it takes for me not to kill you? His voice was rough, strained. Every moment we're together, I imagine it, sinking my fangs into your neck, drinking until your heart stops. Your blood tastes like sunlight, Evangeline. Do you understand what that means? It's an addiction, a craving that grows stronger every time I'm near you. She should be terrified. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to put distance between herself and this beautiful, deadly creature. Instead, she lifted her hand and placed it against his chest, where a heart should beat. Then why haven't you? She whispered. The question seemed to break something in him. He closed his eyes, leaning his forehead against hers, his breath, unnecessary but habitual, ghosting across her lips. Because, he said, his voice breaking, for the first time in 3 centuries, I want something more than blood. When I'm with you, I remember what it was to be Cassius, not the vampire king, not the monster, but the man I was before the darkness took me. You make me want to be that man again. You still are that man, Evangeline said, her hand moving to cup his cold cheek. The monster wouldn't have saved me from Mordecai. The monster wouldn't have asked my permission before tasting my blood. The monster wouldn't be fighting so hard not to hurt me right now. He opened his eyes, and she saw tears in them. Impossible, miraculous tears from a creature who shouldn't be able to cry. I am damned, he whispered. I am cursed. I am a killer and a predator, and everything that dwells in nightmare. But when you look at me with those eyes like my sister's, like sunlight captured in human form, I almost believe I could be saved. Maybe you can be, she breathed. The space between them disappeared. Cassius's mouth found hers with desperate hunger, but it wasn't violence. It was yearning. Centuries of loneliness and isolation breaking against her warmth like waves against stone. His lips were cold. His kiss tasted of darkness and blood and ancient sorrow, but underneath it all was something achingly human. Desire, hope, need. Evangeline kissed him back, her hands tangling in his dark hair, her body pressed against his unmoving chest. She felt his control wavering, felt the predator straining against the man, but he held back. He didn't bite, didn't feed, didn't take more than she was willing to give. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, one from habit, one from necessity, Cassius rested his forehead against hers once more. You will be my destruction, he said softly, or my salvation. I cannot tell which. Perhaps both, Evangeline whispered, echoing her words from earlier. And in the cold chapel where a man had died and a monster had been born, something new began to take root. Something that defied the laws of darkness and light. Something that tasted like sunlight in the endless night. Chapter 7. The Hunter's Moon. The attack came 3 nights later, during the blood moon. Evangeline woke to screams echoing through the castle corridors. Human screams, Mrs. Thorne's voice sharp with terror. She threw on her robe and ran to her door, flinging it open despite every warning she'd been given. The hallway was chaos. Flames licked at the ancient tapestries, casting writhing shadows across the stone walls. The acrid smell of burning sage and silver filled the air. Scents she'd learned meant only one thing: vampire hunters. "Get back inside!" Mrs. Thorne appeared from the smoke, her face streaked with soot. "They've breached the wards. The master is—" An explosion rocked the castle, sending both women stumbling. Through the windows, Evangeline saw figures in black scaling the walls, crossbows loaded with silver-tipped bolts, holy water grenades strapped to their belts. "Where is Cassius?" Evangeline demanded. "The Great Hall, defending the others. But Lord Mordecai—" Mrs. Thorne's eyes widened with horror. "Sweet God, he's the one who let them in. He betrayed us all." Ice flooded Evangeline's veins. Mordecai had allied with the hunters, the ultimate taboo among vampire kind. But why? The answer came in the form of crimson silk appearing through the smoke. "Looking for me, little sunlight?" Mordecai's smile was all triumph and cruelty. Blood stained his fangs, Mrs. Thorne's blood. Evangeline realized with horror as the old woman collapsed. "The hunters will keep Cassius busy while I claim what should have been mine from the beginning." Evangeline ran. She fled through corridors she barely knew, Mordecai's laughter chasing her like a physical thing. Behind her, she heard the sounds of battle, vampires shrieking as silver found flesh, hunters shouting battle prayers, the clash of ancient power against holy fury. She burst into the library and slammed the doors, throwing the heavy bolt. It wouldn't hold him long, nothing could, but perhaps long enough to find a weapon, a hiding place, something. Her eyes fell on the shelves of ancient texts, and a memory surfaced. Cassius showing her a book bound in red leather, telling her it contained the oldest vampire laws, the bindings that held their society together. Blood oaths, covenant bonds, ancient magic that even vampire kings could not break. She found the book and tore through its pages with trembling hands, searching for something, anything, that might help. There, the Covenant of Sunlight. In times before memory, when the first vampires walked the earth, there existed those rare mortals whose blood carried the essence of day within night's realm. Should such a mortal offer their blood willingly in defense of the covenant, the bond formed transcends death itself, granting the vampire temporary immunity to silver and sacred weapons for the duration of one moon cycle. The door exploded inward. Mordecai stood framed in splintered wood, his eyes blazing red with bloodlust. "Clever girl, hiding among books, but there's nowhere left to run." "I'm not running," Evangeline said, surprised by the steadiness in her voice. She held up the knife she'd found on the reading desk. Old, ceremonial, its blade etched with symbols she couldn't read. "I'm choosing." "Choosing what? Death?" He advanced slowly, savoring her fear. "Cassius cannot save you. He's pinned down by a dozen hunters with blessed silver. Even now, they're driving stakes toward his heart. You'll be mine, and then I'll drain you slowly, tasting every drop of that precious sunlight blood before you die." "No." Evangeline pressed the blade to her palm, cutting deep. Blood welled up, gleaming in the firelight. "I choose the covenant." She didn't fully understand the ritual, didn't know if it would even work. But she remembered Cassius's words. "Your blood tastes like sunlight." And the ancient text had been clear. Sunlight blood offered in defense could break holy weapons' power. She closed her eyes and whispered words she'd read only moments before, words in a language dead before Rome fell. By blood freely given, by light within darkness, by the bond that defies death itself, I invoke the covenant of sunlight. Power exploded through her. It felt like lightning in her veins, like the sun rising inside her chest. The blood on her palm began to glow, actually glow, golden and warm and impossibly bright. The light spread up her arm, across her body, until she blazed like a star brought to earth. Mordecai screamed, throwing up his arms against the radiance. Where the light touched him, his flesh sizzled and smoked. "What have you done?" he snarled. "That ritual requires, it needs." "True love," said a voice from the doorway. Cassius stood there, his clothes torn and bloodied, silver burns marking his pale skin. But he was alive, and in his eyes burned something fierce and tender and eternal. "The covenant of sunlight only answers to mortals who offer their blood in defense of one they truly love," he continued, moving to stand beside Evangeline. The golden light emanating from her didn't burn him. Instead, it seemed to flow into him, washing away the silver burns, healing wounds that should have been permanent. "Impossible," Mordecai hissed. "She's known you barely a week. Love doesn't follow mortal timelines," Cassius said softly, taking Evangeline's bleeding hand in his. "Not when it's written in starlight and shadow, in every life and death since the world began. She is my salvation, and I am her damnation, and we chose each other anyway." He raised her hand to his lips and drank. The moment her sunlight blood touched his tongue, transformation rippled through him. His eyes blazed silver white, his skin took on a faint warmth, and the shadows that always clung to him recoiled as though burned. He looked almost human, almost alive, powered by her light, her love, her willing sacrifice. "The hunters," Mordecai said, backing toward the shattered door. "They're everywhere. Even with her gift you cannot." Cassius moved with speed that defied comprehension. One moment he stood beside Evangeline, the next his hand was wrapped around Mordecai's throat, lifting him off the ground. "You betrayed the covenant," Cassius said, his voice death itself. "You allied with hunters. You threatened what is mine. And for that, even your immortality cannot save you." "Please," Mordecai choked. "Mercy!" "I am the vampire king," Cassius whispered, "and I have no mercy left." He tore Mordecai's head from his shoulders with one brutal motion. The body turned to ash before it hit the ground, ancient flesh finally meeting the oblivion it had escaped for centuries. Cassius turned back to Evangeline, and she saw the monster in him fully, the killer, the predator, the creature of darkness. Blood stained his mouth, violence burned in his eyes. But when he looked at her, when he saw her still glowing with sunlight despite her fear, his expression softened. "The hunters," she whispered. "Your people." "We'll survive," he said, pulling her close. "Thanks to you. The covenant's power flows through me now. Silver cannot touch me. Holy water burns like rain. For 1 month, I am immune, and they will learn what it means to attack the Vampire King's home." He kissed her forehead, gentle despite the violence still thrumming through him. "Stay here," he commanded. "Lock the door, and know that I fight for you." Then he was gone, a shadow with purpose, death given elegant form. And Evangeline stood alone in the burning library, her blood still glowing gold, and realized she had fallen in love with a monster who loved her back. Chapter 8. Blood and Ashes. Dawn came with silence. Evangeline remained in the library through the night, listening to the sounds of battle fade to nothing. The golden glow of the covenant had dimmed to a faint warmth beneath her skin, pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. Her hand still bled sluggishly where she'd cut it, but she couldn't bring herself to bandage it, not when Cassius's lips had touched that wound, not when her blood had become the weapon that saved him. When the first rays of sunlight pierced the smoke-stained windows, she finally ventured into the corridors. The castle was a graveyard, Ash marked where hunters had fallen. The Covenant's power channeled through Cassius had turned him into something the holy warriors couldn't combat. Their blessed silver had done nothing, their prayers falling silent against the righteousness of true love's protection. But the price had been high. Scorch marks blackened the walls where holy water grenades had exploded. Shattered furniture lay scattered like broken bones. And everywhere, the acrid smell of burned flesh, vampire and human alike. She found Mrs. Thorne in the servants' quarters, pale but alive, her throat bandaged where Mordecai had fed. "The master?" the old woman croaked. "Alive. Fighting." Evangeline knelt beside her. "Rest. It's over." "It's never over, child," Mrs. Thorne whispered. "Not for creatures like them. Not for the humans foolish enough to love them." Evangeline had no answer to that truth. She found the other vampires in the Great Hall, Lady Seraphine, Lord Thaddeus, and 4 others whose names she'd never learned. They stood in a circle around something she couldn't see, their faces drawn with an emotion she'd never witnessed in their kind before. Grief. "What happened?" she asked, approaching slowly. Lady Seraphine turned, and Evangeline saw tears tracking down her porcelain cheeks, blood tears, dark and viscous. Lord Ambrose fell defending the catacombs. The hunters broke through before the master's power could reach him. Silver through the heart. In the center of their circle lay Ash, all that remained of one of their covenant. A vampire who had walked the earth for perhaps centuries, reduced to nothing but gray powder and fading memories. "He was the youngest of us," Lord Thaddeus said quietly. "Only 200 years old. He still remembered what it was to be human, to love, to hope." His scarred face turned toward Evangeline. "Your gift saved us, girl. But not all of us. Remember that when you wonder if love is enough." Before she could respond, the great doors crashed open. Cassius strode in, and Evangeline's breath caught. He was covered in blood and ash, his clothes torn, his hair wild. But he was alive, and more than that, he was radiant. The Covenant's power still glowed faintly beneath his skin, giving him a vitality she'd never seen in any vampire. He looked almost mortal, almost warm, almost alive. His silver eyes found her immediately. Evangeline. Her name on his lips was prayer and curse combined. He crossed the hall in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms, heedless of the blood staining his clothes. "You're safe. Tell me you're safe." "I am." She clung to him, feeling the unnatural stillness of his body against hers. "Mrs. Thorne is injured but alive. The others—" "I know." His voice cracked. "Ambrose is gone. 12 of the day servants perished in the initial attack. The hunters. I killed 23 of them. 23 humans who believed they were doing God's work." He pulled back to look at her, anguish in his ancient eyes. "What have I become, that I slaughter in your name?" "You became what you've always been," Evangeline said softly. "A protector. You saved your people, Cassius. You defended your home. I became a monster. You were already a monster." She cupped his blood-stained face in her hands. "And I love you anyway." The words hung in the air between them, impossible and inevitable. The other vampires had gone utterly still. Lady Seraphine's eyes widened. Lord Thaddeus made a sound that might have been approval or warning. "You shouldn't," Cassius whispered, his forehead pressed against hers. "You shouldn't love something dead and damned. You should run from this place. Find a man who can give you sunlight and children and a life that doesn't end in darkness." "Too late," Evangeline said, and she meant it. "I invoked the covenant of sunlight. The ritual required true love, and it answered. My blood knows what my heart has been trying to deny. I fell in love with you the moment you looked at me in that auction hall and saw the sun." "I saw my salvation," he corrected. "I saw everything I'd lost, everything I thought I could never have again, reflected in your eyes." Then take it, she whispered. Take me. Not as property, not as prey, but as someone who chooses you, knowing exactly what you are. His hands trembled against her back. The covenant bond lasts only a month. After that, I return to what I was, vulnerable to silver, burned by sacred things. And you will have given your blood, your protection, your love to a creature who can never truly be what you deserve. I don't want what I deserve, Evangeline said fiercely. I want what I choose, and I choose you, Cassius. Every dark, terrible, beautiful part of you. He kissed her then, in front of his entire covenant, with the ashes of battle still settling around them. It was not a gentle kiss. It was desperate and claiming and edged with the knowledge that their time together would be measured in borrowed moments and stolen nights. When they finally broke apart, Lady Seraphine spoke. The covenant of sunlight is ancient magic, older than our kind, but there is another ritual, equally old, equally powerful. Her gaze moved between Cassius and Evangeline. The blood marriage, a bond that transforms mortal into something between human and vampire, not quite either, but something new. Something that can walk in both daylight and darkness. No. Cassius's voice was sharp. That ritual requires 3 exchanges of blood under 3 different moons. Lady Seraphine continued relentlessly. Tonight was the blood moon. In 2 weeks comes the dark moon, and 2 weeks after that, the full moon. 3 exchanges, freely given, and the mortal becomes eternal twilight, neither living nor dead, but suspended between, bound to their vampire mate for all eternity. Evangeline's heart thundered. Is it painful? Excruciating, Lord Thaddeus said bluntly. The transformation feels like dying 3 times over. But if you survive, and not all do, you gain immortality without losing your humanity. You can walk in sunlight, but you'll need blood to survive. You'll age slowly, dying only if your bonded mate dies. It's too dangerous, Cassius said, his grip on Evangeline tightening protectively. I won't risk you for— It's my choice, Evangeline interrupted. Just like invoking the covenant was my choice. Just like loving you is my choice. She met his silver gaze steadily. I don't want a month, Cassius. I don't want borrowed time. I want eternity, with you. In whatever form that takes. He stared at her for a long moment, emotions warring across his face. Hope, fear, love, desperation. Finally, he whispered, 3 exchanges, 3 moons, and if you survive, you'll be mine forever. I'm already yours, Evangeline said. Then let's make it eternal. Chapter 9. The First Exchange. They prepared the ritual chamber as night fell. It was a room Evangeline had never seen before, deep in the castle's foundations, carved from living rock and illuminated by hundreds of white candles. Ancient symbols covered every surface, etched into stone by hands long turned to dust. At the chamber's center stood a circular altar of black marble, its surface polished to mirror brightness. Lady Seraphine oversaw the preparations with the gravity of a priestess conducting sacred rites. The blood marriage is not to be undertaken lightly, she said, arranging silver chalices filled with wine so dark it looked like blood. The mortality rate is 40%. Those who fail the transformation don't simply die. They become something worse. Neither human nor vampire, but a revenant. Mindless, hungry, trapped between worlds. You're trying to frighten her, Cassius said from where he stood by the door, his arms crossed. I'm trying to prepare her. Lady Seraphine's ancient eyes fixed on Evangeline. Child, are you certain? Once the first exchange is complete, there's no turning back. You must complete all 3, or the incomplete transformation will drive you mad within a year. Evangeline looked at Cassius, her vampire king, her monster, her love. He'd changed into robes of midnight blue, his dark hair bound back, his face pale and perfect in the candlelight. He looked terrified. "I'm certain," she said. The other vampires arrived as the moon rose, Lord Thaddeus, and 3 others whose names she'd learned in the days since the battle. Lady Morgana, Lord Valerian, and Lady Isolde's portrait come to life in the form of Lord Draven, who shared the same ancient bloodline as Cassius's long-dead sister. They formed a circle around the altar, witnesses to a ritual that hadn't been performed in over a century. "The last blood marriage ended in tragedy," Lord Thaddeus said quietly. "The mortal survived the transformation but went mad from the duality, unable to reconcile human conscience with vampire hunger. She begged her mate to kill her after 50 years of torment." "Thaddeus," Cassius growled. "Enough. She should know the truth." "She does." Cassius moved to Evangeline's side, taking her hand. His skin was still warm from the Covenant's fading magic, but soon he would return to cold stone and shadow. "And she's braver than any of us." Lady Seraphine raised her hands, and the candles flared higher. "Let the ritual begin. Mortal, step to the altar." Evangeline's legs trembled as she approached the black marble circle. The surface reflected her face back at her, pale, determined, alive. How much longer would she see that reflection? How much longer before she became something else? "Remove your gown," Lady Seraphine instructed. Heat flooded Evangeline's cheeks, but she obeyed, letting the silk slip from her shoulders to pool at her feet. She stood in only her thin chemise, gooseflesh rising on her arms despite the candle's warmth. Cassius stepped onto the altar with her, and she saw the hunger blazing in his silver eyes, not just for blood, but for her. All of her. Body and soul and everything in between. "The first exchange is blood for blood," Lady Seraphine intoned. "The vampire gives his ancient essence, the mortal gives her living warmth. What is dead learns to feel. What is alive learns to endure." She handed Cassius a ceremonial dagger. Not silver, but obsidian, its blade sharper than any metal. "Your wrist," Lady Seraphine instructed Evangeline. Cassius took her left hand with infinite gentleness, turning it so her inner wrist faced upward. The blue veins beneath her pale skin pulsed with life, with warmth, with everything he'd lost 3 centuries ago. "This will hurt," he whispered. "And I'm sorry. For all of it. The pain, the transformation, the eternity of darkness you're choosing. But I'm not sorry enough to stop you." "Good," Evangeline breathed, "because I'm not sorry at all." He pressed the blade to her wrist, quick, precise, deep enough to matter. Blood welled up, crimson and bright, running down her arm to drip onto the black marble. Where it struck the stone, the ancient symbols began to glow with ethereal light. Cassius brought her wrist to his mouth and drank. His eyes fluttered closed, his body going rigid with the taste of her. She felt the pull of his feeding, not just the physical drawing of blood, but something deeper. He was drinking her warmth, her mortality, her very life force. With each swallow, she felt herself growing lighter, colder, as though he were pulling her toward the edge of some vast darkness. Just when she thought she might faint, he pulled away. Blood stained his lips, and his eyes, when they opened, blazed like silver fire. "Now the vampire gives," Lady Seraphine said. Cassius raised the dagger to his own wrist and cut without hesitation. His blood flowed black in the candlelight. Not red like hers, but dark as midnight, thick as oil. Where it dripped onto the altar, it hissed and steamed. "Drink," he commanded softly. Evangeline leaned forward and pressed her mouth to his wrist. The taste exploded across her tongue, not copper and salt like she'd expected, but something infinitely more complex. She tasted centuries of darkness and lonely nights, ancient power and older sorrow. She tasted the man he'd been before death claimed him, the monster he'd become after, and everything in between. His blood was cold, sliding down her throat, burning like ice, but she drank anyway, sealing their fates together. Power flooded through her veins, foreign, terrifying, intoxicating. Her heartbeat slowed, then thundered back to life with renewed force. Her senses sharpened until she could hear every breath in the chamber, smell the wax and stone and ancient magic, feel the weight of immortal gazes upon her flesh. When she finally pulled away, gasping, the world had changed. Colors were sharper, sounds clearer. She could see in the shadows now, could sense the cold presence of the vampires surrounding them, could feel Cassius's power thrumming against her skin like a living thing. "The first exchange is complete," Lady Seraphine announced. "The bond has begun. In 2 weeks, under the dark moon, you must drink again. And 2 weeks after that, under the full moon, the transformation will be complete, or you will be lost." Evangeline swayed, and Cassius caught her, lifting her into his arms as though she weighed nothing. "I've got you," he murmured against her hair. "Always." She looked up at him, and for the first time she truly saw him, not with human eyes, but with something more. She saw the cracks in his perfect facade, the vulnerability he hid beneath centuries of control, the desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, love could save even the damned. "2 more exchanges," she whispered, "and then we're eternal." "Eternal," he agreed, carrying her from the ritual chamber. Behind them, the candles extinguished themselves one by one, leaving only darkness and the smell of blood and ancient magic. The first step toward forever had been taken. Only 2 more remained. And Evangeline had never been more terrified or more certain in her entire mortal life. Chapter 10. The Dark Moon's Promise. The 2 weeks between exchanges passed like a fever dream. Evangeline's body was changing, slowly, painfully, caught between what she'd been and what she was becoming. Her senses fluctuated wildly. One moment she could hear conversations 3 floors away. The next, she was deaf to everything but her own thundering pulse. She craved raw meat but couldn't stomach cooked food. Sunlight still warmed her skin, but it hurt now, a dull ache that promised worse to come. Cassius never left her side. He held her through the worst of it, the night sweats that left her shaking, the hunger that clawed at her insides, the moments when she looked in the mirror and didn't recognize her own reflection. Her violet eyes had begun to change, silver threading through the color like moonlight through twilight. "It will get worse," he told her on the 13th night as they sat together in his private chambers. "The second exchange is the most dangerous. Your body will reject what it's becoming. Every cell will fight the transformation. Some don't survive the pain." "Tell me about the ones who did," Evangeline said, curled against his chest. His heart didn't beat, but she'd grown accustomed to that stillness. It was as much a part of him as his silver eyes or his ancient sorrow. "There was Marcus and Elena 200 years ago," he began, his fingers combing through her hair. "A Roman soldier and a vampire he'd been sent to hunt. Their love defied both their peoples. The blood marriage saved them from execution. Neither fully vampire nor human, they became something new. Something both sides feared too much to destroy. What happened to them? They're still alive as far as I know. Wandering the world, belonging nowhere, belonging only to each other." His arms tightened around her. "That could be us, Evangeline, exiled from both mortal and immortal worlds. Are you prepared for that?" "As long as I'm with you," she whispered. "I don't care where we belong." The dark moon rose on the 14th night, a sky empty of light, perfect for secrets and transformations and ancient magic that thrived in absolute darkness. They returned to the ritual chamber. This time, Evangeline descended the stairs without fear. Her body knew what was coming, craved it even as her mind screamed warnings. The vampire blood from the first exchange called to her, singing in her veins, demanding completion. The covenant had gathered again: Lady Seraphine, Lord Thaddeus, Lady Morgana, Lord Valerian, and Lord Draven. But this time, their faces were grave. "We've received word from the Vampire Council," Lady Seraphine said as Evangeline and Cassius took their places on the altar. "They've heard of the blood marriage. They're concerned." "Let them be concerned," Cassius said coldly. "No, law forbids this ritual." "No law," Lord Thaddeus agreed, "but precedent warns against it. The last 3 blood marriages ended in tragedy. The Council fears you're creating something that could threaten the balance between our kind and humanity." "Something that could bridge both worlds," Lady Morgana added softly, "or destroy them." Evangeline's newfound senses picked up the tension crackling through the chamber. "They want to stop us. They want to kill you before the 3rd exchange," Cassius said bluntly. "The Council has sent envoys. They arrive tomorrow night." Fear spiked through her, but underneath it ran something darker: rage. After everything she'd endured, everything she'd sacrificed, they wanted to destroy her for daring to love across the divide between life and death. "Then we complete the 2nd exchange tonight," she said, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. "And we survive until the full moon. Let them try to stop us." Cassius studied her face, and something like pride gleamed in his silver eyes. "You're already more vampire than human, aren't you? That defiance, that fire, that's not mortal weakness, it's immortal strength." "Teach me to use it," Evangeline said. "Make me strong enough to fight for what's mine." Lady Seraphine stepped forward with the obsidian dagger. "The 2nd exchange requires more blood than the first. The vampire must drain the mortal nearly to death, then give enough of his essence to pull her back. It is the closest you will come to true death before the final transformation." "I'm ready," Evangeline lied. She wasn't ready. How could anyone be ready to feel death's cold embrace? But Cassius took her face in his hands and kissed her with devastating tenderness. "I will not let you go," he whispered against her lips. "I will follow you into death itself and drag you back to me. Do you understand? You are mine, and I do not surrender what is mine." "Possessive monster," she murmured. "Always," he agreed. The ritual began. This time, when Cassius cut her wrist, he didn't stop at a few mouthfuls. He drank deeply, his fangs extending to pierce her vein more efficiently, his body pressing her back against the cold altar. Evangeline felt her life pouring out with each pull of his mouth, felt herself dimming like a candle in wind, darkness creeping in at the edges of her vision. Her heartbeat slowed. Once, twice, 3 times, each beat weaker than the last. She was dying. Actually dying. The ritual chamber faded to gray, then black. She couldn't feel Cassius anymore. Couldn't feel anything but cold spreading through her limbs like ice crystallizing in her veins. Then, fire. Cassius's blood hit her tongue, forced past her lips, and it burned. Not cold like before, but scorching, as though she'd swallowed molten silver. It raced through her dying body like lightning, restarting her heart with violent force. Her back arched off the altar. A scream tore from her throat, primal, agonized, barely human. The transformation accelerated. She felt her bones shifting, strengthening. Her canines lengthened into points sharp enough to pierce flesh. Her nails hardened to claws. Every cell in her body was being rewritten, caught between human warmth and vampire cold, becoming something entirely new. Through the pain, she felt Cassius holding her, his voice in her ear. "Come back to me. Evangeline, come back. I need you. I love you. Come back." Love. The word was an anchor, a lifeline, a reason to claw her way back from the darkness threatening to swallow her whole. Her eyes snapped open. The world had changed again. She could see every detail now. The individual flames of hundreds of candles, the ancient script covering the walls in languages dead for millennia, the faces of the watching vampires painted in shades of silver and shadow. And Cassius, blood staining his mouth, terror and hope warring in his immortal eyes. "Did it work?" she rasped. "Look at yourself," he whispered. She raised her hand and watched, fascinated as her skin shifted between mortal warmth and vampire pallor, flickering like candlelight, unable to settle on either state. Her fingernails had become elegant claws, retractable but deadly, and when she ran her tongue over her teeth, she felt the sharp points of developing fangs. "Not human," Lady Seraphine pronounced, "not vampire, but something between. The second exchange is complete." "One more," Evangeline whispered, "under the full moon." "One more," Cassius agreed, pulling her into his arms. "And then nothing, not the council, not heaven, not hell itself, will be able to separate us." She kissed him, tasting his blood on both their lips, feeling the bond between them strengthen with every shared heartbeat. They had 14 days until the full moon, 14 days until the Vampire Council's envoys arrived to stop them, 14 days to prepare for war, because Evangeline had learned one fundamental truth in her transformation. Love was worth fighting for, even if that fight cost her the last shreds of her humanity, even if it made her a monster. She would complete the blood marriage, or die trying. Chapter 11. Eternal Twilight. The Vampire Council arrived on the 13th night, 3 days before the full moon. They came in a procession of black carriages drawn by horses whose eyes burned like coals. 7 ancient vampires, each older than Cassius, each powerful enough to command their own territories across the world. They entered Castle Ravencrest with the authority of those who believed themselves untouchable. Evangeline watched from the tower window as they disembarked, her transformed senses cataloging every detail. She could smell their age, dust and dried blood, and centuries of accumulated power. She could hear their hearts, or rather, the absence of them. And she could feel their hunger, ancient and insatiable, rolling off them like fog. "They've come to judge us," Cassius said from behind her, his arms wrapped around her waist, and she leaned back against his chest, drawing strength from his presence. "To determine if you're a threat to the vampire world. And if they decide I am, then we fight." His voice was cold certainty. "Every vampire in this castle will stand with us. We've already sworn the blood oath." Evangeline turned in his arms to face him. In the past 2 weeks, she'd grown to match his supernatural beauty, her skin luminous, her violet silver eyes hypnotic, her features sharpened to inhuman perfection. She was no longer the servant girl from the auction. She was becoming something legendary. "I don't want our eternity to begin with a war," she said softly. "Then we convince them you're not a threat." He cupped her face tenderly. "3 more days, beloved. 3 more days and the transformation completes. They cannot stop us if we finish the ritual." The council convened in the great hall at midnight. They sat in judgment like ancient gods. Lady Nightshade in robes of purple silk, Lord Constantine with his scarred face and military bearing, Empress Catalina who'd ruled vampire kind for 1,000 years, and 4 others whose names carried weight in the immortal world. Evangeline stood before them with Cassius at her side, refusing to show fear even as their combined power pressed against her like a physical weight. "Cassius of House Ravencrest," Empress Catalina spoke, her voice like wind through a crypt. "You stand accused of attempting the blood marriage, a ritual forbidden by ancient precedent due to its catastrophic failures. How do you answer?" "The ritual is not forbidden," Cassius replied, his voice ringing with authority. Discouraged, yes. Dangerous, certainly. But no law prevents two beings from choosing each other, regardless of the risk. The risk is not merely to yourselves, Lord Constantine growled. Blood marriages create abominations, creatures too powerful to control, too unstable to trust. They inevitably go mad and must be destroyed. You would create such a creature deliberately? I would create my mate, Cassius said simply, my equal, my eternal companion. Lady Nightshade's ancient eyes fixed on Evangeline. Step forward, child. Evangeline obeyed, moving into the center of the circle of judgment. 7 pairs of immortal eyes studied her like a specimen under glass. You are neither human nor vampire, Lady Nightshade observed. Your heart beats, but slowly. You cast a reflection, but it wavers. You walk in sunlight, but it pains you. What are you, creature? I am Evangeline, she said, lifting her chin. I am a woman who chose love over fear. I am becoming what I was always meant to be. Arrogant, Lord Constantine spat. Human arrogance wearing a vampire's face. Is it arrogance to fight for what you love? Evangeline challenged. You speak of catastrophic failures, but what of Marcus and Elena? What of the blood marriages that succeeded? You fear what I might become instead of celebrating what I choose to be. And what do you choose? Empress Catalina asked, leaning forward with genuine curiosity. Balance, Evangeline said. I choose to be the bridge between your world and mine. I choose to prove that love can transcend death, that transformation doesn't require surrendering everything human, that we can evolve into something better than either mortal or monster alone. Silence fell across the hall. Then Lady Nightshade laughed, a sound like breaking glass. She has spirit, Cassius. I'll grant you that. But spirit alone won't prevent madness when the duality tears her mind apart. Then let me prove it won't, Evangeline said desperately. Let me complete the third exchange. If I survive, if I remain sane, if I become what I believe I can be, will you accept what we've created? The council members exchanged glances, centuries of silent communication passing between them. Finally, Empress Catalina spoke. You have 3 days. Complete your blood marriage under the full moon. If you survive the transformation with your sanity intact, we will recognize your bond and grant you protection under vampire law. But if you fail, if you become the monster we fear, Cassius himself must destroy you. Do you accept these terms? Evangeline's blood ran cold, but she didn't hesitate. I accept. As do I, Cassius said, though his voice cracked with emotion. Then it is decided, the Empress declared. May the full moon bring wisdom or mercy. You will need one or the other. The next 3 days blurred together in preparation and dread. Cassius taught her to control her emerging powers, the supernatural speed, the enhanced strength, the ability to hear hearts beating rooms away. She learned to retract her fangs, to mask her predatory nature, to move between human and vampire states with increasing fluidity. But always, beneath the training, ran the current of fear. What if I go mad? What if the transformation breaks me? What if Cassius has to kill the creature I become? The full moon rose on the 14th night, huge and silver, bathing the castle in ethereal light. For the final time, they descended to the ritual chamber. The covenant had gathered, but now the council stood witness as well, their ancient faces impassive as Evangeline and Cassius took their places on the altar. She wore white, traditional for a bride, even one marrying death itself. The third exchange, Lady Seraphine intoned, is complete union. The vampire and the mortal drink simultaneously, their blood mingling in perfect balance. What emerges is neither one nor the other, but something eternal, something new. She handed them both the obsidian dagger. Evangeline and Cassius faced each other, their hands trembling as they raised the blades to their wrists. Around them, the ancient symbols began to glow without prompting, as though the magic itself knew what was coming. "Together," Cassius whispered. "We live or die together." "Together," Evangeline agreed. They cut. Blood flowed. Hers still warm and red, his cold and dark. They pressed their bleeding wrists together, letting the blood mingle, then brought their joined wrists to each other's mouths. They drank. Power exploded through the chamber like lightning. Evangeline felt Cassius's essence pouring into her, even as hers flowed into him. A perfect exchange, a complete joining. His centuries of darkness met her mortal light, and where they collided, something miraculous was born. She felt herself dying and being reborn in the same instant. Her heart stopped, restarted, found a new rhythm, slower than human, faster than vampire, perfectly between. Her body crystallized into its final form, beautiful and terrible and utterly unique. When she opened her eyes, the world had become something transcendent. She could see in complete darkness and blazing light. She could feel Cassius's emotions as though they were her own, his love, his fear, his desperate hope. And when she looked down at her hands, she saw them flickering between states, mortal warmth and vampire pallor, life and death, human and monster, perfectly balanced. "Evangeline?" Cassius breathed, his silver eyes wide. She smiled, feeling her fangs sharp against her lips. "I'm here. I'm sane. I'm yours." He crushed her against him, and she heard something she'd never heard before. His heart, beating for the first time in 300 years, syncing its rhythm with hers. "Impossible," Empress Catalina whispered. "His heart." "The blood marriage works both ways," Lady Seraphine said, wonder in her ancient voice. "She didn't just become partly vampire, he became partly mortal. They've truly balanced each other." Cassius pulled back to stare at Evangeline, his hand pressed over his chest where his heart now beat. Slow and steady. Alive. "You brought me back," he whispered. "All the way back." "We brought each other back," Evangeline corrected. "From loneliness, from darkness, from the curse of being incomplete." She turned to face the council, still held in Cassius's arms, both their hearts beating in perfect synchronization. "I am eternal twilight," she declared. "I am the bridge between your world and mine. I am proof that love transforms, that evolution is possible, that we don't have to remain what we were. And I will not apologize for choosing to become this." Empress Catalina rose from her seat, and slowly, incredibly, she knelt. "I have lived 1,000 years," the ancient vampire said, "and I have never witnessed such a miracle. You have my blessing, Evangeline of House Ravencrest. May your union show us all what we might yet become." One by one, the other council members knelt, even Lord Constantine, though his face remained skeptical. The covenant followed, all of them bowing to the impossible thing that had been created in their midst, a true blood marriage, successful and sane, and more powerful than anyone had dreamed. Cassius lifted Evangeline's hand to his lips, kissing the wrist where their blood had mingled. "My bride," he whispered, "my salvation, my eternal twilight." "My monster," she replied, smiling through tears of joy. "My king, my forever." And as dawn approached, the first dawn she would face as something neither human nor vampire, Evangeline stood with Cassius at the tower window and watched the sun rise. It didn't burn. It didn't kill. It simply warmed their joined hands, blessing a love that had defied death itself. They had become eternal. Together. In the space between darkness and light, where all impossible things are born.